Hi, welcome to SYNAPSE Talks from SYNAPSE U of T. In this podcast, we chat with people about their work, careers, and insights within the incredible discipline of neuroscience. In this episode, Christy and Zara meet with Meghan Testerman. Meghan is a librarian at Princeton University who specializes in behavioral sciences and neuroscience. We filmed this episode in March 2022, so some references may be outdated. However, we are confident that the ideas in our conversations are timeless. Enjoy! Hi there, welcome to SYNAPSE Talks. This is a podcast where we sit down and chat with neuroscience professionals to learn a little bit more about their work and their lives. I'm Christy.
I'm Zara. And I'm Meghan.
Yes, you are. Hello, Miss Meghan Testerman. Miss Meghan Testerman is a behavioral science librarian at Princeton University. She works in the Department of Psychology and at the Princeton Neuroscience Institute. She's also an advocate for equity, open science, and research transparency in STEM. Hi, Meghan. How are you doing today?
I am doing so well, and I'm so happy to be here with you both.
Well, we're glad that you're here with us as well. So let's talk a little bit more about what it is you do. So could you tell us about what it is a librarian does? What are your roles? What are your responsibilities? And what's an overview of your job?
Sure. So what you get with libraries is very varied depending on the library setting. So my daily work life is very different from someone in, say, a public library setting or a nonprofit library. I work in an academic library setting as a subject liaison, a subject specialist and liaison to the Department of Psychology in the Princeton Neuroscience Institute. And what I do is I work with researchers in psychology and neuroscience to help them manage their research information. So if I can elaborate on that for a moment, this idea of research information, we might think of research information as things like data or code, like sort of obvious things. But research information can really also be things like your stimuli that you use in experiments, your pre-registrations, your protocols, your figures, your preprints, your manuscripts, even things like conference posters and slides can be research information. And all of that research information can be organized and managed and stored and shared. And so what I do is I work with researchers to help them find appropriate tools to help them make that process easier and piece those tools together into a workflow, which will help them, do the best kind of science that they can while also meeting these new standards that we have these days for, rigorous, open, transparent, good science.
Yeah. So
that's how I spend my days.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you're kind of the person who directs scientists through this mass of resources and information that science has built up, whether it be literature or some type of tools or some type of checklist. It's you who guides them through it, really.
Yes, it's myself as a subject librarian, but we also have within an academic library setting, we also have other kinds of librarians. We have data librarians, we have librarians who specialize in visualization, we've got curators and archivists and bibliographic records specialists and IT people who help us, create these digital tools and upkeep these digital tools. So I work as a team with the rest of the people at the library to deliver that kind of research support.
Right.
To the folks that are in my department.
Yeah, and I know that me and Zara mentioned that we find this extremely fascinating, that there's so many specializations and so many different roles delegated to people working in information and especially in science. And we were curious about something, actually. So we noticed that you did do a bachelor's in political science and then a master's in library and information studies. And then later you furthered into neuroscience. Actually, you earned a certificate in neuroscience, and that's really cool. So we'd like to ask you, while we're on the topic of specialization, what interested you about becoming a psychology and neuroscience librarian?
Yeah, Yeah, the question of how I got here is definitely one that I ask myself every single day as I'm going to work. Like, how did I get here? It was a very winding path. But the thing is that, really with like a lot of librarians that I talk to in different library settings, a lot of us have the same story, which is that, we set upon one path and then so we sort of veered at some point into something else. I was actually like working in my first job at a library, and I was doing that for like, I don't know, maybe a year or something. And then one day the librarian was like, she said to me, you'd make a really good librarian. And I was like, oh my God, you're totally right. And like, I was like, I got to drop everything and like do a library degree. Like I think it's maybe a career that doesn't easily pop into people's minds. I knew I wanted to be in a university setting, but I always thought that meant that I had to be a professor. I never thought that there might be other like paths that you can take in academia that are not that kind of path. So I did do some work in other libraries before I got to academic libraries. I worked in a Department of Defense library in Europe. I did some work for the Providence Athenaeum, which is the second oldest membership library in the United States. I did some work for the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, which is a nonprofit, and the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library Museum. Presidential libraries are their own whole big thing. But during that time, I was also serving as a non-scientist on institutional review boards. So for listeners who might not know what an institutional review board is, it's a committee that is formed to review research proposals for research involving human subjects, and we review it for ethical soundness to make sure participants' rights are guaranteed. So I did this for about 7 years, and I think it was this kind of really intense experience with research that enabled me to pivot into academic libraries. And that was how I got my first job as a psychology and counseling librarian, which I did for about 2 years before I took this position at Princeton as the behavioral sciences librarian.
Sort of this cascade from something you never expected, yes. And then suddenly someone bringing up that you had the skill that you could really work towards. And I guess that you are in a position where you really enjoyed it, and you've managed to be in a position where you can work with psychology and neuroscience specifically.
Yeah. It is. I mean, from my perspective, it is less about the kind of content of the research that you all are producing as scientists. It's more about the research process and the research information. Like if you need some help finding a place to like store your data, it doesn't necessarily matter to me what that data is about. It just matters to me that it has like the right metadata and it goes into the right place.
Right.
So that enables me to kind of like specialize in, research tools and things that you all might not have time to go explore.
Yeah.
So I can do that kind of exploration and valuation on your behalf. And then when you come to me and say, you need something to help you organize your protocols, I can kind of say, oh, well, I know about this tool called protocols.io. We have an institutional license for it. I know other people in your field are using it. And that takes a huge, huge amount of work off of your shoulders to figuring that kind of thing out.
No, definitely.
Yeah, I know that sounds really interesting. And I feel like, it sounds like you've had so much experience in different libraries and different settings. And I think it would just be really interesting, like if you have any memorable or interesting moments that you've had either through your like academic career or then like joining these different libraries or like your time at Princeton. Is there anything that kind of has stuck with you as your career as a librarian?
I can tell you probably the most fun that I've had in my job. That might be an interesting story.
Yeah.
When I came to Princeton, I was so excited about being in a place that had a rare books, like in special collections. We have an amazing rare book, special collections library at Firestone Library on Princeton's campus. And I'm telling you, like, if the whole science librarian thing does not work out, I want to like do this again as a rare book librarian because it's just such a fun nerd out. So I did a collaboration with Emma Sarconi, my colleague from Rare Books, where we actually went to the collection and pulled examples of early psychology and neuroanatomy texts. And we invited people from the Department of Psychology and the Princeton Neuroscience to come up the hill into the library that they never ever go into, and go down to rare books, and to join us for this like interactive exhibit where we showed them all the materials, gave them like a good context about all these different items, and then we gave them time to interact with them, where they actually got to go and look at these super old manuscripts or early prints from the 1600s. They got to see a phrenology cast. They got to see Carl Jung's work, just so many fun treats for them. And that was probably the most popular thing that I've done as a librarian at Princeton. And it was probably one of the most rewarding things to see all these scientists who normally never really get a chance to leave the lab or leave the building, come into this new space and be inspired to think about their work in a different way just by interacting with these cool old library materials. So that was definitely a peak experience for me.
Yeah, we're so glad you brought that up because, I find that absolutely fascinating, the ability to look back and reflect almost in retrospect instead of just looking forward constantly, which so much of science is about. We were wondering, on the topic of your experience with curating these rare early texts, how valuable do you think it is that we as scientists or we as people working in academia acknowledge early neuroscience in our work nowadays?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I think there's a whole field of history of science, right? One of the interesting topics that came up in that exhibit is the topic of phrenology and physiognomy, which are, let me see how I can put this, historical examples of how science was used at one point in time to back things like racism and homophobia and ableism. And we had those texts that we had to bring out and present in that very particular context. And it's important to remember those kinds of things. The idea of phrenology, right, which is that you can determine somebody's personality and characteristics by, the formation of their head or facial features or something like that. We might think that that's a really outdated idea that, was in the late 1900s and doesn't exist anymore. But then we remember that there's things happening today like facial recognition, AI. We are training AI tools based on pictures of people's faces that have been, sourced from the internet or other places. And there is this kind of neo-phrenology that's happening that if you are not aware of that history, then you might be tempted to, what do they say about if you don't learn history, so there's this tendency to repeat it, and we definitely don't want to go down that road again. So maybe the past is not so different, not so distant from us, even though we tend to think of science as being like very much in the here and now and very much about, experimental methods, and it's somehow devoid of these ethical questions, but of course it's not.
So we have to be almost willing to admit that we are not always superior and better than who we were before in science, then maybe by looking at the past. Yeah.
Always good to have one eye on the past, right?
Right.
Know where you came from, know where the discipline came from, know where science came from, and always endeavor to try to make it better.
Yeah, well, that is the goal with continuous progress with science. Yeah, thank you so much for speaking about that. That was so fascinating. I love that. We also wanted to talk a little bit more about open science, which we know that is something that you're passionate about and you've done quite a lot of work in. So, just for our listeners, could you define what open science means?
Sure. Open science has a lot of different interpretations, but the core idea here is that whenever possible and appropriate, we try to open the research process in order to share the research information and outputs that we are generating with the intent of accelerating science, of forming collaborations, moving science forward, sharing information, and hopefully at the end of the day bettering humanity and the world. It is a relatively new idea, in the earlier in the scientific process, like the history of science, will say, the sharing of information was a little bit more free flowing. And then during a certain point of history, everything kind of locked down and people got very nervous about sharing data or being scooped or not being, given credit for the work that they were doing. And perhaps that was with good reason. But these days we need data, we need research information and outputs to be shared across research communities. And neuroscience is such a great example, because if you take things like MRI data, fMRI data, it's so expensive to generate that data, to generate those images, that not everybody can do this. So it benefits us. It behooves us to really share that data so that other research groups can get that data and also do their own analysis on it, which just helps. It just helps produce better science at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. So it's more about being open, honest, transparent about what you're doing with your research and what results you came up with. Yeah. Right. So you mentioned expense. We were wondering, is that a very significant and major issue that keeps coming up in scientific publication and literature, this idea of money being linked to your research, maybe leading to some scientists not being as truthful or not being as open as they probably ethically should be?
Yes. Yeah, I would definitely 100% say that the cost of doing science and the cost of publishing is prohibitive. And we see that, I work at a very privileged, a very well-funded institution. Not everybody does. And when you have such a high price on doing science and producing science, you really do have to look at who is being shut out. And what we see today is a lot of people, maybe not being able to do their best work because it is so cost prohibitive. And perhaps that makes sense, when it comes to producing research and needing to purchase things like, large, giant MRI machines or something. But when it comes to the cost of publishing, I really feel like there are other publishing models that might be available to us that would not incur a cost at that particular junction upon the individual researcher, because it really does shut too many people out that I cannot in good conscience say that I support this.
Right. Yeah. And as young scientists, I'm sure that it's often important to acknowledge the environment that we're working in and the conditions or the restrictions that are placed upon making progressive research. And would you say that this is something that we should all, as people working in science and people looking to work in science, keep in mind in order to address these issues? And how do you think that it's something that we can address these issues with?
Oh gosh, yes. This is, it's such a big topic. And what I'm kind of feeling these days is that we are all going to have to exert pressure to change the status quo. And unfortunately, that burden does also fall on early career researchers, but also people like myself who are information professionals who manage large funds like I do for the university library, and where I spend our money, what things that I purchase. It also falls on, tenured professors, institution leadership, to change things like recognition and tenure and promotion, and try to break this entire cycle of just really strange academic publishing that we have going on. So yes, I think we're all going to have to pitch in, and I wish that burden wasn't placed on early career researchers, because you'll definitely have enough to be getting on with. But unfortunately, it's going to take everybody, I believe.
Well, fortunately, we do have people like you who are, guiding, advocating for things like this, who we can learn from, maybe make some strides in,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've talked about the barrier of funding in science, and I know there's so many more barriers that scientists face, whether it be, gender or socioeconomic status, or just like the color of your skin can be a barrier in science. And we know that you're a big believer in fair treatment, as everyone should be, for fair treatment, everyone in science. So can you kind of just explain to us what equity in science looks like, and what are the biggest barriers for promoting equity in science?
Yes. And so for me and my angle on this, there's so much that I I feel limited in how much I can address diversity, equity issues in science, because there's a pipeline there that I'm not involved in, which is like, recruiting and bringing in new talent and hiring and changing promotion and tenure and abolishing things like the postdoc, which I just don't think is a good idea, and removing things like precarity in academia and things like this. There's a certain amount of pressure that I can exert as an individual and through my position and by leveraging the institution that I work at to try to change those things. I kind of try to approach it from basically our previous conversation, which is, trying to change things like scholarly publishing, access to research tools, trying to remove as many barriers as I can find that prevents you all from doing good science. And one of the ways that I kind of explain this is, if the library, traditionally speaking, is a place that has things like materials and resources and tools and services, but there's this like old-fashioned idea that like you have to go up to the library to get that kind of help, right? Like you guys have to come track me down to ask me a question, and you have to know like how I could possibly help you, and who actually knows that. And if you are at a place like Princeton and you come from an institution that doesn't have the same kind of resources as, Princeton or our peer institutions, then, as a student, you have to basically kind of, fill that knowledge gap. Like you have to figure all those things out, figure out how to get help, figure out who's going to help you, where to go on campus, all this kind of thing. So what I try to do when it comes to the library is I try to get around that barrier by bringing library resources and tools and services directly to the researchers. So I do a form of embedded librarianship where I am present in the building. I have an office there. I'm digitally embedded in lab spaces. I have a lab librarian program. I'm embedded in the research lifecycle. I work as a research collaborator. I do all of these things to try to bring the limited amount of expertise that I have, but also, the knowledge of our resources and tools and services and other library units and things like that right to you, to where you are producing science, so that you don't have to go out and find it. So that when you have a question, somebody is kind of right there to say like, hey, you should go check out this thing, or you should talk to this person. And so I try to address it that way, which is a very limited mode of addressing these massive DEI issues in science. But that's where I can get traction. And so that's what I do.
No, yeah, definitely. So we actually, this concept of having like a STEM lab librarian, we saw it on your blog, and it was just, we were blown away because it's something that I don't think Christy and I ever thought about a system like that. But it's, when you think about it, it's so useful because it's like a librarian being like associated with a researcher, and it's just like a very bonded relationship, which I feel like also increases like trust and just reliability between the librarian and the researcher. And on that topic, like how does that system kind of work? So would it be like a librarian is associated with a researcher throughout their career, or is it like based on whatever researchers need, or they're like working on a specific study that they like reach out and then you kind of go to them? Like how does that work?
Yeah. So the librarian program works through the lab structure that exists in the psychology department and at PNI, which is lab-based research. So many of the faculty members are also principal investigators or PIs that head up a research lab within the department or the institute. So these are kind of pre-packaged like research communities focused around one particular research area. And a lot of them use things like listservs or Slack workspaces or Microsoft Teams or something like that to communicate with one another. So what I do is I join these digital spaces, and then honestly, I really sit back as an observer and I listen and learn to like what they're doing and the kind of research that's happening. And then when questions come up that I think either myself as their librarian or another library unit or even another campus unit can address, then I can just reach out to that researcher directly and help them, direct them to wherever they need, sort of like a library concierge. But this idea of like working with researchers and with the labs, I do that as well. And what I do for that is I really work with researchers to help identify those research tools that are going to help them and to help them create their own research workflow. And when it comes to labs, what this looks like, which is something that I've been doing lately, is working with lab managers and PIs to come up with a framework of research tools and best practices and data management plans and things like that, to help them come up with this framework for managing research information for the lab as a whole. And typically what this produces is something like a lab manual. So these lab manuals have a lot of information about things like lab culture and, roles and funding. But if it's a good lab manual, there should also be a section in there on what we do with our research information. And so I help them process that and come up with good workflows that are good guidance, not a structure to be stuck in, but good guidance for how they want to handle their research outputs.
Very cool. So on the topic of having, a relationship with librarians in the academic sense, I think it's something that should definitely start as a student, as an undergrad. You should already kind of be developing the skills necessary to reach out to a librarian and know how to ask for help in that area. Why might you think that, because personally, I have not ever actually reached out to a librarian throughout my undergrad career, even though, we all know that they're there and what they're there to do. Do you have maybe any idea why librarians aren't as approached as they should be?
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. And there's no shame in you saying that. There really is not. It's so strange because when we have this idea of the library, we think of people coming into the library because we've got books and we've got study spaces and maybe we have cool other things that you can check out. It's a very, very much like a physical thing. You've got to be there to do it. But honestly, when it comes to the sciences, it's just a very different thing from area studies or humanities or the arts or even the social sciences. And a lot of that has to do with just the primacy of digital research material. So you are absolutely right. As a scientist or as an academic researcher in the sciences, even as early in your path, you could, in theory, access everything that you need on your laptop and never once come into the library. And that is, that is just reality. That is one of the reasons that I came up with, this very elaborate process of embedding myself into the department and into the research life cycle, is because that is just the reality. That is the behavior of researchers. But we do also have this other interesting bit of evidence that tells us that academic researchers, especially in the sciences, tend to reach out to their research community before reaching out to a library or a librarian when they need help. And that's true even if there's someone like me, like a liaison librarian who's there on hand to help you. And these research communities is a really interesting idea to me, because I could kind of think of the Department of Psychology and the Princeton Neuroscience Institute as being these really large research communities. But actually there are these, spontaneous research communities that are developing within the departments, happening all over the place. It could be your lab, it could be your research group, it could be a study cohort, a journal club. I could even zoom out of the departments, and I see that my researchers are joining research communities around, things like conferences or subdisciplines. And there's even a really vibrant research community on Twitter. I can go on Twitter and get some amazing, really look at and listen to really honest conversations that my researchers are having about what it means to be an academic researcher in the 21st century. And I think that to me kind of explains it. There is already this really good organically formed network of help. Unfortunately, it's maybe not the most efficient help, because maybe your lab mates kind of don't know things that I might know about, how to handle research information or research tools or best practices and things like that. But this is exactly why I try to embed myself into those research communities, because I believe that in the sciences, that is just, if you're going to be a science librarian, that needs to be the way that you approach it. I will also try to get you to come to the library. I will also try to get you to come to Rare Books.
Yeah.
We should start going to the library. I've been working on designing a research study with a friend of mine, and we're completely lost. If not for the deadline, we probably would have sought out the library, but also I'm not sure we would have. Not that the library isn't, it's very useful. It's just, I guess it is intimidating a little bit, because you've got this, a lot of us have this idea that the library is static instead of dynamic in its function and how it can work within the academic community. But it's really, which is why we were so interested in your idea of having a STEM specific lab librarian, someone who collaborates, someone who forms a personal working bond with a lab or a researcher, someone who's embedded in the research process, this directory of someone who actually knows how to navigate the literature and the resources needed for an efficient research design. Before, you mentioned that you were in collaboration with labs, you would be working on forming almost a lab manual, a framework. Before the framework, if we didn't have that framework, that indexed list of resources and research reports, the process of research, the process of how labs go about with their data, is that almost a little bit more like they would instead just compile it all in a very unnavigated index or directory?
Yes, not to throw them under a bus, but yes. So I think maybe part of the confusion is that, first I should say that, when it comes to working with the library, the role of the library really does shift as you get from undergraduate into post-baccalaureate research. Graduate students and postdocs are doing very different things. In undergraduates, it makes sense to, use the library to help them find literature and do things like this. But when it does come to post-baccalaureate research, it really is more about management of research information. What we have when it comes to managing research information in the labs and for individual researchers is that there's a huge amount of freedom for individual researchers to figure out what to do with their stuff kind of on their own. So what to do with their data, what to do with their code, if they're going to actually, do a pre-registration, if they're not, if they're going to submit a preprint to a preprint server when they submit their manuscript to a publisher or not. There's a lot of flexibility in there. And I think that causes a lot of stress for early career researchers trying to just figure out on their own what they're supposed to be doing with their stuff. So the idea there is, with this framework, is to take some of that confusion out of it and to say things like code, programming. You're writing some kind of programming. We recommend that you use Git for version control and you use it in conjunction with GitHub. Just to have a simple sentence like that, either in the form of a lab manual or some kind of guidance from me or from the library, really does go super far in helping someone figure out maybe I should not just work on my code on my machine and not have it, any kind of version control on it or something like this. It's an overwhelming amount of options. I think there's a really great research group out of the Netherlands that tried to do a count of how many research tools are out there to help you manage this stuff, and they counted over 400 before I think they just stopped.
Yeah.
So in that, how are you supposed to figure out what to do with it? How are you supposed to train yourself for best practices for things like data management or versioning and things like that? I think sometimes you can get that training within your lab. Sometimes you get it in seminars. Sometimes you have a really good research methods class. Sometimes you get it at a conference or something like that, but it can be kind of piecemeal. It can help to have somebody who's on the ground who can help you work through that, like a librarian.
No, yeah, that makes sense. So with this overwhelming amount of information, I'm guessing that the only way to really sort through that is to create more specialization. So let's say that you want to do X study, you had to use X resource that would match up with X study. And on that topic, do you think that if we were to see the widespread use of STEM lab librarian systems, that we'd start seeing more people enter librarianism wanting to specialize in certain subjects as you are, and as you are in neuroscience and psychology?
Yes, I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. But I have to say a caveat here, which is that, part of working at Princeton is that we have a very small population. I don't know if most people know that we only have about 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, what is it? I think it's 8,000 total undergraduates and graduate students, which makes the work that I do very scalable, right? I have 2 departments which total about 200 to 300 undergraduates, about 380 some post-baccalaureate researchers, including faculty. Like, that's actually a pretty manageable population, but I have numerous colleagues who are STEM librarians, like the entire breadth of that entire acronym they have to cover, and for them this is an overwhelming prospect.
Right.
So I hope I think the direction that 21st academic libraries are going to have to take is realizing that we need to invest very heavily in research support in the form of training for open science and supporting research tools and research workflows and working with researchers. I went to a really great open science conference, and Keith Weber, who's the University Librarian of Carnegie Mellon, said, all science will be data science very soon. And I believe he's right about that. And I believe there is incredible opportunities for future librarians to be more heavily involved in things like data science and data management and research information and things like that. But the library as an institution can still be very old-fashioned and like the idea of their brick and mortar spaces and their books and their study spaces, which is lovely. And I like all that stuff too. But this is the direction I think that we're headed.
And so in the future, that is going to be more expansion of the STEM lab librarian system then. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I would love to have lots of people come be STEM librarians with me.
I hope so too. And maybe some of our listeners today might, after this podcast, consider, I'm in poli-sci, but actually I think I also want to be a STEM lab librarian, that brings us...
I will say, if that is true, if there's a listener who's like, wow, I totally want to get in on academic libraries, my email is mtesterman@princeton.edu. You can hit me up anytime. I will talk to you your ear off about what academic libraries are like, and will absolutely, talk to you about the profession.
Well, you heard it here, folks. You have open office hours with a real-life librarian from Princeton University. Take your opportunity, take your chances. Grad school looks for experiences. Yes. All right, that actually brings us to our last question. Of much relevance actually to what we just brought up. How do you think students that aren't currently studying informational or communication studies, or haven't even considered that within their field of future career prospects, but want to do what you do in the future, how can they use what they are studying right now to their advantage in the future?
Oh yeah, that's great. My advice would be to kind of go where your heart goes. But if you like, working in an academic library environment or an academic environment, or if you suspect that you might like working with these in these different library settings, the typical career path, in as much as there is one, is to do an undergraduate degree in something you really like, and then you do a master's in library science or library science and information studies, which is what I did. And then from there, go into a librarian. The master's really is kind of the golden ticket that gets you into the professional path of a librarian. But that being said is changing. And in academic libraries, we are now advertising for jobs at Princeton, which is, an MLS, a Master of Library Science or equivalent. So we have a lot of folks with PhDs who are just transitioning out of academia, but still kind of want to stay in an academic environment and are doing career path changes. So I would say, go do the thing that you're good at. But if you do want to, there's lots and lots of different paths. I mean, as you heard me talk about my meandering path to my position today, there's lots and lots of different ways to get into this. But again, if it is something that you're interested in, I would definitely be happy to talk to you.
Yeah.
All right. So that does bring us to the end of this podcast. We're so happy that you took the time to talk to us. I mean, we learned so much. I'm so enlightened that I'm definitely gonna go to a library as soon as I can.
Go to the library more.
Yeah. Yes, go to libraries.
Go to your libraries.
Go to your libraries. But this has also just been such an honor and privilege to me to talk to you all. You are doing such amazing work. I cannot wait to see what you do in the future. I'm going to be keeping track of all of these projects, following you on Twitter. The world needs to get ready for you folks.
No,
for sure.
It's the honor is all ours. It really is. We were really excited about this interview. It's such a rare voice to hear from, mostly because so much of what we hear from in our current academic life is go to med school, go to grad school, be a doctor, right. Do lab research. If you're not doing lab research, consider becoming a professor. That's the only path. And then suddenly we have this option. And so I'm sure like many of our listeners or anybody who happens to come across this podcast, they'd be extremely grateful that you extended your hand out and extended your contact out for that. Because I think, just speaking from you today, it is absolutely fascinating what you do, and your idea of having STEM lab librarian, where someone is actually there to guide them through this huge, overwhelming mass of data and resources. That is a resource that I think would be incredibly helpful to anybody starting out in science, or anybody who's working in science and wants to get more navigated throughout it. Yeah. So, Zara, our very last question and our beloved outro.
Yeah. So our last question, kind of a little bit of an advice piece. So think of a scenario where, let's say you have a child who comes to you and is like, I want to be a psychology and neuroscience librarian. What would be the biggest piece of advice that you'd give them?
I would say pay attention to the research. Like, pay attention to the process, how it's done, who's doing it, how it works. That is at the center of my entire universe is the research life cycle. And I am still learning and understanding how different research is done in psychology and neuroscience so that I can better meet research needs. But if I could kind of do things over again and give myself a head start on this position, that's exactly what I would do. Is I would learn more about the research process, probably before starting this job. But we'll do it now.
Yeah, get involved in research, kids. You heard it.
Email Miss Testerman. She's there for a reason, just like your library. All right. Yeah. Zara?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for coming on our podcast. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Stick around. We've got more Synapse Talks podcast coming your way very, very soon. And we wish you all a good night, good morning, and good afternoon wherever you are. And stay safe.
That's it for today, folks. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Synapse Talks by Synapse U of T. By the way, the marvelous music that plays at the start and end of the episode is called Arcade by Artur Aravidi. It is licensed under an Attribution Non-Commercial 4.0 International License from Creative Commons. You can access this music at freemusicarchive.org. And if you want to hear more episodes of Synapse Talks, you can visit our website at synapse.sa.utoronto.ca. That's synapse.sa.utoronto.ca. Bye for now.